An old rancher who hadn't cared about anything in 2 years found tiny barefoot tracks in the snow. They belonged to a 6-year-old girl walking through a November blizzard with a wounded rabbit pressed against her chest. She looked at him with eyes no child should have, eyes that had seen too much, survived too much, and whispered just 3 words. "Meet my mommy. She's hurt. Please." He followed her into the wilderness. What he found was a woman, aiming a rifle at his chest with a broken leg, and a secret so dangerous it had already gotten 2 men killed. She had been living on his land for 3 years, and he never knew. But the people hunting her did, and they were coming back. What happened next didn't just save her life, it saved his. And it started with a barefoot girl who believed that broken things could be fixed, if you're brave enough to ask for help. Welcome to Cowboy Dusk channel, where the Old West lives again through stories of grit, love, and redemption under wide open skies. This story reminds us that guilt can bury a man alive, but choosing to show up for someone else can dig him out. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't pulling a trigger. It's staying when everything tells you to run. If this story stirred something in your chest, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Which moment hit you the hardest? Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Cowboy Dusk so you never miss a story worth telling.
Caleb Morgan had seen plenty of things die in his life: men, cattle, dreams. The particular light in a woman's eyes when she realizes you have got nothing left to give. But he had never seen anything look as alive as the barefoot girl standing in the middle of a November blizzard at the end of his fence line, holding a wounded rabbit against her chest like it was the last warm thing in the world. He noticed the tracks first. Small, bare, pressed into fresh snow that should not have held anything smaller than a deer print. Caleb had been working the eastern fence since before dawn, pulling a calf free from tangled wire with hands that had gone stiff in the cold. His horse stamped behind him, breath coming in white clouds, and the wind cut through the valley like it had personal business with every living thing in it. Montana Territory in November was no place for bare feet. He followed the tracks because something in his chest would not let him turn away. They led along the fence line, wobbling where the snow drifted deep, then cutting east toward the timber. Whoever made them was small and walking with purpose, and had been out here long enough that the edges of the prints had started filling in. Then he saw her. She stood maybe 30 feet ahead, half hidden by a pine trunk, watching him with eyes that did not belong to a child. Brown eyes, dark as creek mud, set in a face that was blue around the lips and white everywhere else. Red hair matted against her forehead. A torn coat 3 sizes too big wrapped around her thin body. And pressed against her chest, cradled like a baby, a rabbit with a broken leg that twitched and kicked weakly against the fabric. She did not cry, did not shiver. She had gone past both of those things into the still, focused calm of someone who had learned a long time ago that falling apart was a luxury she could not afford. She was maybe 6 years old. Caleb stopped walking. He kept his hands where she could see them, which was a thing he had learned in 30 years of marshalling. You do not approach a frightened creature with your hands hidden. The girl studied him, head tilted slightly, eyes moving from his face to his hands, to the colt on his hip and back again. Measuring, the way a deer measures the distance to the tree line before deciding whether to run. Then she spoke. One whispered sentence that would change the rest of Caleb Morgan's life, though he did not know that yet. "Meet my mommy. She is hurt. Please." The rabbit kicked again. The girl held it tighter. Caleb took 1 step forward, then another. The girl did not run. She watched him come the way you watch weather rolling in, with the understanding that whatever happens next is bigger than you, and all you can do is stand in it. He knelt in the snow so his eyes were level with hers. Up close, her lips were cracked, and her fingernails were black with dirt, and there was a thin scratch down her shin that had bled and frozen. She smelled like wood smoke and pine needles and something green he could not name. "What is your name?" he asked. "Josie." "How far is your mama, Josie?" She pointed east, past the timber toward the foothills that climbed into the Bitterroot Range, far enough that a barefoot child walking through a blizzard should not have been able to make it. But she had. "Can you show me?" She nodded once. "Quick!" Like she had been waiting for someone to ask that question for a very long time and had almost given up hoping anyone would. Caleb lifted her onto his horse. She weighed nothing. Bones and hunger and determination packed into a body no bigger than a feed sack. She settled into the saddle in front of him without being told how, tucked the rabbit inside her coat and pointed east. He rode. The trail she directed him along wound through timber so thick the snow barely reached the ground. Josie guided him with small gestures. A finger pointed left, a tug on his coat sleeve to turn right. She did not speak again, but her directions were precise, and after 10 minutes, Caleb realized something that made the hair stand up on the back of his neck. She was leading him around his own bear traps. He had set those traps 2 years ago along the eastern timber line. Never told a soul where they were. Not Doc Mendez, not the hands he had let go when the ranch got too quiet to justify paying anybody. Those traps were his secret, set in his grief and never checked because checking them would have required caring about something. And caring had been the first thing to go after Jacob died. But this child knew. She guided the horse around every single one without hesitation, as if someone had drawn her a map. He noticed other things. Small notch marks carved into tree trunks at a height a child could reach. Trail markers, made by a small hand with a small knife, and spaced just far enough apart that you would miss them unless you were looking, or unless you were 6 years old and had been walking these woods since you were 3. Caleb touched the pocket watch in his vest. Jacob's watch. Cracked glass, but the hands still moved. He wound it every night, had not missed once in 2 years. It was the last thing that connected him to his brother, and he reached for it whenever the world asked him to make a decision he was not sure he was ready for. The trail dropped into a ravine. The wind died. Snow fell straight down in the stillness, and the only sounds were the horse's breathing and the creak of cold leather. Then the smell hit him. Gunpowder, fresh, no more than an hour old. Caleb pulled the colt from his hip and reined the horse short. Josie's fingers dug into his coat sleeve, and for the first time since he had found her, something moved behind those still, careful eyes. Fear. Real, bone-deep, little girl fear. "Mama shot," she whispered. "Bad people came. Mama shot, so they would go away." The horse stamped. The snow kept falling. And Caleb Morgan, who had not cared about anything or anyone in 2 years, kicked the horse forward into the ravine because a barefoot girl had said please, and he had forgotten how to say no to a child who was not afraid of blizzards, but was afraid of whatever waited at the end of this trail. Caleb had kicked down outlaw doors on the Mexican border without a second thought. But stepping into the clearing ahead, where a woman lay on frozen ground with a rifle aimed at his chest and blood matting her hair, he hesitated. Because outlaws, he understood. A mother defending her child was something else entirely, and the rules he knew did not apply. The cabin sat against the hillside like it was trying to disappear. And it nearly had. Moss covered the roof so thick it looked like part of the earth. The walls had been darkened with mud and ash until they blended with the rock face behind them. Brush had been trained to grow across the entrance, and if Josie had not led him straight to it, Caleb would have ridden past without a second glance. This was not amateur hiding. Whoever had done this knew fieldcraft, military fieldcraft. The kind Caleb had seen in army camps during the Indian campaigns, where a man's life depended on his ability to become invisible. But right now, nothing about the scene was invisible. A woman lay on the porch, left leg bent at an angle that made Caleb's stomach turn even at a distance. bone visible through torn fabric below the knee, blood from a wound on her forehead where she had struck the step going down. Her face was white as the snow around her, jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cords. And despite all of that, she held a Springfield 1873 aimed at Caleb's center mass. Her hands did not shake. "Put my daughter down," she said through her teeth. "Step back." Her voice carried across the clearing like a blade. No panic, no pleading. The flat, controlled tone of someone who had made peace with pulling the trigger and was simply waiting for a reason. Caleb kept his hands visible. "Your leg is broken," he said. "You cannot hold that aim from that position much longer. Try me." Caleb studied her. Red hair, darker than Josie's, pulled back in a braid half undone, brown eyes with flecks of gold in them, sharp as broken glass. She was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that comes from years of not enough food and too much work. But there was nothing weak about her. The rifle was steady. Her breathing was controlled. And within arm's reach on the frozen porch boards lay a hatchet, because even with a broken leg and a rifle in her hands, she had kept a backup weapon close. He set Josie down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. Then he raised both hands, palms out. "Name is Caleb Morgan," he said. "This is my land, and you will freeze to death before sunrise if nobody sets that bone." The woman's eyes narrowed. Something moved across her face. Recognition, maybe. Or the calculation of a mind that never stopped measuring distance and threat and escape routes. "I know that name," she said. "I know your land, your habits. I know you do not sleep past 4, and your chimney smoke goes thin by midnight." Caleb stared at her. "I have been living on your property for 3 years," she said, "without your knowing. So now you know. Do what you are going to do. 3 years. On 2,000 acres of land he owned and barely used and had stopped caring about the day they put Jacob in the ground. This woman and her child had been living in his grandfather's cabin for 3 years, and he had never once noticed. Josie walked to her mother, knelt beside her in the snow, put both small hands on Ruth's arm. "He carried me, Mama. He did not have to. He carried me." Ruth looked at her daughter. Something passed between them that Caleb could not read. Private. Painful. The kind of conversation mothers and daughters have without words, when they have been alone too long with nobody else. The rifle lowered. Not all the way, but enough. Caleb crossed the clearing in 6 steps. He knelt beside her and looked at the leg. It was bad. A compound fracture below the knee, the bone pressing against skin that had already started to swell and darken. She needed a doctor. She needed a hospital. She had neither, and from the look on her face, she knew it. "I am going to set this," Caleb said. "Going to hurt. I know what pain feels like." He looked around for something she could bite down on. Found a leather strap hanging from a nail on the porch rail. Saddle repair leather, thick and clean. He handed it to her. Ruth took it, put it between her teeth, looked at him with those gold-flecked eyes and nodded once. He set the bone. The sound was something Caleb would carry for the rest of his life. The grinding shift of bone against bone, the wet resistance of torn muscle, and through all of it the muffled sound Ruth made through the leather strap. Not quite a scream. Something worse. Something held back by sheer will, and the knowledge that her daughter was watching from the doorway with her hands pressed over her ears and tears running down her face in perfect silence. Silent crying. The kind a child learns when making noise is not safe. That hit Caleb harder than anything. A 6-year-old who had learned to cry without sound. "Done," he said. "It is back." Ruth's breathing slowed. She released the strap from between her teeth, looked at her leg, then at him. Her fingers had dug into the porch boards hard enough to leave marks. "You have got gentle hands," she said, "for a man your size. My brother used to say that, said I was wasted on cattle. Your brother got a name? Jacob. He is dead. My husband's name was Samuel. He is dead too." They looked at each other. Two people who had introduced themselves through the names of the dead, because the dead were more real to them than anything the living had to offer. Caleb stood. He needed to splint the leg properly, needed supplies from the cabin, needed to figure out how this woman was going to survive a Montana winter with a broken leg and a 6-year-old and nobody who knew she existed. He stepped into the cabin. It was small, 2 rooms at most, clean in the desperate way of someone who controlled what little she could. A cast-iron stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs and preserved food, the smell of green things drying everywhere. And on a shelf behind the bed, half hidden behind a jar of dried sage, a leather-bound journal with a brass lock. Ruth's eyes followed his when they landed on it. She reached back with one hand and pushed it behind her. Casual. Practiced. Like she had hidden that book 100 times before. On the cabin wall, charcoal drawings, animals, trees, the creek below the hollow. And one image repeated 3 times in different sizes. 3 figures standing together. A woman, a small girl, and a man with no face, standing far away from the other 2. Josie's drawings. Caleb looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at the girl standing in the doorway with tear tracks drying on her cheeks, and a wounded rabbit still cradled inside her coat. She had been drawing a family that did not exist, and the man in her picture had no face because she did not know what he looked like. Caleb found splint material under the bed. Clean cloth strips, thin boards cut to size, a jar of something that smelled sharp and medicinal, all prepared, all precise. This woman had been ready for a broken bone the way some people were ready for winter. Because out here, alone, a broken bone was winter, a thing that could kill you if you were not prepared. He carried the supplies back to the porch, splinted the leg, while Ruth directed him with clipped professional instructions that told him she knew more about medicine than any ranch wife should. She did not flinch, did not cry out, just gripped the porch rail and breathed through it with a control that was both admirable and heartbreaking. When it was done, Caleb stood in the doorway, ready to leave. "You will go now," Ruth said. "It was not a question, and you will not come back." He put his hat on and stepped onto the porch, then stopped. "Those 3 riders your girl mentioned, they were on horses branded with a P inside a circle." Ruth said nothing, but her hand moved to the rifle. "Prescott brand," Caleb said. "I know that mark, and if I know it, I know they will be back. Next time they will not come to look." He set his Colt revolver on the table beside her. "I will be back at dawn. Shoot me if you want. But I am coming back." He walked into the snow and did not look behind him, but he heard just barely Josie's voice from inside the cabin. Small, quiet, hopeful in a way that hurt to hear. "He is coming back, Mama. I told you he would." And Ruth's voice, barely a whisper. "We will see." Doc Mendez watched Caleb load salt, sugar, flour, bandages, and a box of 45-70 cartridges onto his horse at 3 in the morning and said, "Viejo, last time you packed like this, we were riding into Sonora. You nearly died. This is different. How?" "This time I am more scared." Doc was the only friend Caleb had left in the territory. Mexican-born, 62 years old, with hands that could calm a panicked stallion and a mouth that could not be calmed by anything. He had served alongside Caleb during the martial years, patching up horses and occasionally men when the real doctors were too far or too dead to help. He lived on a small spread 3 miles west of Caleb's ranch, and showed up uninvited at least twice a week because, as he put it, somebody had to make sure the viejo tonto had not decided to stop eating again. Stupid old man. That is what viejo tonto meant, and Doc said it with the particular affection of someone who had earned the right through decades of friendship and at least 3 occasions of saving each other's lives. Now, Doc leaned against the barn door, arms crossed, watching Caleb cinch the supply pack with the focused attention of a man who was not going to let this go without an explanation. "There is a woman," Caleb said. "And before you start with that, it is not like that. She has a child. She is hurt. She has been living in my grandfather's cabin for 3 years without anybody knowing. Doc's eyebrows went up. 3 years. 3 years. And you just found her. Her girl found me. Walked through the blizzard barefoot to get help. 6 years old, Doc. Barefoot in November. Because her mama broke her leg and there was nobody else. Doc was quiet for a moment. The humor left his face. Who is she? Do not know yet. Not all of it. She knows medicine. She shoots better than most men I have ridden with. And she is scared of something worse than a broken leg in winter. Prescott? The word hung in the air between them. In the territory, the Prescott name carried weight the way a loaded gun carries weight. Thomas Prescott was mayor of Stillwater. Virginia Prescott ran the town from behind her husband's shadow with the iron certainty of a woman who believed she had been appointed by God to decide how other people should live. And Deputy Emmett Harlan was their dog on a leash, badge and all. 3 riders, Caleb said, Prescott-branded horses, came to her cabin yesterday. She fired on them. Doc whistled low through his teeth. She shot at Prescott men. Warning shots. She can shoot a flea off a dog's ear at 200 yards if she wants to. She did not want to kill them. She wanted them gone. And now you are riding back with supplies. I am. Doc studied him. The way he had studied Caleb 1,000 times over 30 years, reading the man behind the silence. You know what you are riding into, Viejo. If Prescott has business with this woman, and you put yourself between them, you become business too. I know. You have not cared about anything in 2 years. Not your ranch, not your cattle, not yourself. I have watched you die by inches since Jacob, and now, a woman you met yesterday has you loading a horse at 3 in the morning. That is either the best thing that has happened to you, or the worst. Caleb tightened the last strap. Could be both. Usually is. Doc pushed off the barn door. I will check your fence line while you're gone. And Caleb, be careful. Whatever that woman is hiding from, it has kept her in the woods for 3 years. That is not casual trouble. That is the kind that follows. Caleb rode east before dawn. He came back every morning for 3 days. The first day, Ruth did not speak to him. Not a word. He arrived at dawn with the supplies, set them on the porch, and went to work. He spent the entire day building a defensive perimeter around the hollow. Tripwire alarms made from tin cans and cord, positioned at every approach to the cabin. Low profile, hard to see, impossible to pass without making noise. Ruth watched through the window. He caught her looking twice, and both times she turned away. But the third time she did not turn away. She watched him string wire across the north approach with a particular intensity, and he knew she had recognized what he was doing. Military-style early warning system, not a hunter's trick, not a rancher's fence. The kind of perimeter a man builds when he has spent years in places where the difference between sleeping and dying is hearing the right sound at the right time. Later, through the closed door, he heard Ruth say to Josie, "Where did that man learn to do that?" Josie said, "I do not know, but he is good at it." The second day, a blizzard pinned Caleb at the cabin overnight. He slept on the floor by the stove, boots on, hat over his face, the way he had slept in 100 line camps and trail stops over the years. He woke once in the night and found Josie sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him, watching him sleep. "You snore," she said. "So I have been told. My papa snored too." The words hung in the dark cabin like something fragile. Caleb did not move, did not want to break whatever had made her speak. "He had big hands," Josie said, "like you. But he sang bad. Jacob sang bad too." "Is Jacob your papa?" "My brother. Where is he?" "He's gone, same as your papa." Josie was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Can you draw a horse?" "No. I can teach you." So she did. By the light of the stove, with a piece of charcoal in the back of a flour sack, Josie taught Caleb Morgan how to draw a horse. It looked like a dog with long legs, and Josie told him so, and the sound he made in response was not quite a laugh, but was closer to one than anything that had come out of him in 2 years. In the morning, Ruth set a bowl of broth in front of him without a word. He ate it. She watched him eat it. Neither of them acknowledged what it meant, which was that a door had opened another inch. Late that night, after Josie had fallen asleep, Ruth asked him the first personal question. "You were Law, were you not?" "Was. Long time ago." Law that quit or Law that got quit? Law that buried his brother and did not see the point anymore? Silence. Ruth did not offer sympathy. She just nodded once, like she was filing the information away in some internal cabinet, alongside everything else she had collected about him over 3 days of watching. The third day, Caleb discovered fresh boot prints circling the hollow. He found them in the morning while checking the perimeter. 2 sets. Iron-nailed soles, the kind of boots you bought in a general store, not the kind you wore in the woods. Town shoes. They circled the hollow from the north, came within 50 yards of the cabin, and turned back. Whoever made them had been careful, but not careful enough to avoid the soft ground near the creek. Caleb erased the tracks, brushed snow over them with a pine branch until the ground looked undisturbed. He said nothing to Ruth. But the clock that had been ticking in the back of his mind since the first day grew louder. That evening, Josie fell asleep early. The rabbit she had brought home was healing, splinted, and wrapped in clean cloth by Ruth's steady hands. Josie slept with it in a box beside her bed, and the small sounds it made in the night were the sounds of something saved, which was maybe why the girl needed it close. Ruth and Caleb sat on opposite sides of the stove. Firelight moved between them, throwing shadows on the cabin walls, and Josie's charcoal drawings and the rows of jars that lined every shelf. The smell of drying herbs was thick and green and alive in a way that made the cabin feel less like a hiding place and more like something that had been grown on purpose. Ruth spoke first. "My husband found something about powerful people in town. A week later, he was dead." Caleb looked at her across the fire. "Accident?" Ruth met his eyes. "That is what they needed people to believe." She said nothing more. He did not push. In his years as a marshal, Caleb had learned that some stories come out like splinters. You cannot pull them. You can only wait until the skin pushes them out on its own. But something had shifted. Ruth had voluntarily opened a door, even if she had only opened it an inch. And through that inch, Caleb could see the outline of something larger. Something that connected a dead husband and a hidden woman, and Prescott-branded horses, and a deputy who buried things that were meant to stay found. He rode home that night through falling snow. The trail familiar now in a way it had not been 3 days ago. His horse knew the way, and Caleb let his mind work while the animal carried him. At the ranch, he did something he had been avoiding for 2 years. He opened Jacob's trunk. It sat in the corner of his bedroom under a horse blanket, exactly where Caleb had put it the day he brought Jacob's personal effects home from the undertaker. He had not opened it since. Opening it would have meant touching Jacob's things, and touching Jacob's things would have meant accepting that Jacob was never coming back for them. But tonight, he opened it. Inside, Jacob's spare clothes, his shaving kit, a Bible with notes scrawled in the margins, a bag of hard candy he always carried because Jacob had a sweet tooth that no amount of frontier living could cure. And at the bottom, an unsealed envelope in Jacob's handwriting. It was not addressed to Caleb. It was addressed to the territorial marshal's office in Helena. Never sent. Caleb's hands were steady as he opened it. Inside, a rough map of Bitterroot Valley drawn in Jacob's careful hand. 3 land parcels circled in red ink. No names, no explanation. Only a note scrawled at the bottom in handwriting that had been hurried. The pen pressed hard enough to tear the paper in places. "Ask the woman at Bitterroot. She has the rest." Caleb stared at the map. Jacob had been investigating something. Something in Bitterroot Valley. Something connected to 3 pieces of land, and a woman Jacob had never mentioned by name. He did not yet know that the woman was Ruth. He did not yet know that what Jacob had been investigating was the same thing that had gotten Samuel Calloway killed. He did not yet know that the conspiracy that had taken his brother reached further and deeper and darker than a map with 3 red circles could show. But he was beginning to hear something. a frequency he had ignored for 2 years, ever since Jacob had come to him on a Tuesday night with worry in his eyes, and asked Caleb to ride with him into the foothills. "There is something rotten in Stillwater, Caleb. Something real bad." He had not listened then. Jacob asked him to ride along, to investigate together, and Caleb had said no. Too tired, too deep in the bottle, too busy drowning in the retirement he had earned and the emptiness that came with it. Jacob rode alone that night, and Jacob died alone. Caleb pinned the map to the kitchen wall beside the window that faced east, toward the hollow he could not see but could not stop thinking about. 3 red circles on paper. A woman who spoke about her husband's death the way soldiers speak about ambushes, and Jacob's voice in his memory, 2 years old and still sharp as broken glass. He had not listened then. He was listening now. Whether he was ready for what he would hear was another question entirely. Deputy Emmett Harlan rode a blaze-faced bay and smiled like a man selling you a horse he knew was lame. He was standing on Caleb's porch when Caleb came back from the hollow on the 5th morning, and the smile he wore had teeth in it. The other rider was Bill Randall, who owned the feed store in Stillwater and made other people's business his primary occupation. Randall was the kind of man who never missed a church service and never missed a chance to spread what he heard there. His presence beside Harlan was not accidental. It was strategic. If Harlan was the badge, Randall was the town's mouth, and between them they could ruin a man's reputation over coffee and biscuits. "Morgan." Harlan tipped his hat. The gesture was friendly. The eyes were not. "We need a word." Caleb dismounted slowly. His horse was lathered from the ride, and the supply pack was empty, which was not a detail Harlan would miss. Harlan did not miss details. That was what made him dangerous. Not his gun, not his badge, his eyes. "About what?" Caleb said. "About why you have been riding east every morning before dawn and coming back after noon." Harlan shifted his weight. "Easy. Practiced. Henderson noticed your tracks heading into the foothills. Consistent. Daily. He mentioned it to me. Henderson ought to mind his fences and let me mind mine. It is a reasonable concern. Nobody goes into that wilderness regular unless they have got reason." Harlan's smile widened. "We have had reports of squatters, poachers, things that concern the law." "Hunting camp," Caleb said. The lie came smooth and quick, the way lies come to a man who spent 30 years talking to outlaws. "I use it when I am working the eastern fence line." Randall leaned forward in his saddle. "Hunting camp you visit every single day. Must be some camp. Must be some business of yours, Bill." "Oh, wait. It is not." Harlan raised a hand, the peacemaking gesture of a man who had never made peace in his life. "Nobody is accusing you of anything, Morgan. Just checking. You know how it is. Small territory, people talk too much, always have." Harlan gathered his reins. But he did not leave. Instead, he sat his horse and let the silence stretch until it became something heavier than conversation. A silence, with weight, with threat. The kind of silence a lawman uses when he wants you to know that the friendly part is over. "You are a good man, Morgan. Keep to yourself. Work hard. Do not cause trouble. Hate to see that change over something that is not worth the cost." They rode off. Randall looked back twice. Harlan did not look back at all, which was worse, because a man who does not look back is a man who knows exactly where he's going and what he will do when he gets there. Caleb stood on his porch until the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then he went inside and sat at the kitchen table and looked at Jacob's map pinned to the wall and the 3 red circles that suddenly felt like targets. They would be back. Men like Harlan did not ask questions once. They asked until they got answers. And when they did not get answers, they went looking. He rode to the hollow that evening, faster than usual, pushing the horse harder than the trail wanted him to. By the time he broke through the timber into the clearing, his shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold, and his hands were tight on the reins in a way that had nothing to do with riding. Ruth was on the porch, was sorting herbs in the last light with hands that moved quick and sure. She saw his face and her hands went still. "What happened?" she said. Not a question, really. A demand. Ruth Calloway did not waste words on questions she already knew the answers to. Harlan came by. Him and Randall from the feed store asking about my daily rides east. The color left Ruth's face, all of it, gone like someone had pulled a plug. She set down the herbs and gripped the porch rail. And for just a second, just a flash, Caleb saw the fear underneath the armor. Not fear for herself, fear for the girl sleeping on the other side of that cabin wall. "They know," she said. "They suspect. Do not know anything yet. Suspecting is enough. Suspecting is how it starts." Ruth's voice went flat. The dead voice Caleb was learning. The one she used when she was most afraid. "They will come looking. Might be tomorrow. Might be next week. But they will come. And when they find this cabin, when they find us, they will not find you. How? How do you plan to stop them?" "Not stop them. Move you. My ranch. Stone walls, defensible position, and a story that makes sense. You are my hired housekeeper. Widow from Colorado Territory. Answered an advertisement. Simple story. Common enough, nobody questions it. They will question it the second they see my face. I lived in Stillwater for 5 years, Caleb. People remember. Some will. But you coming out of hiding and standing in the open is a sight harder to attack than you being found cowering in the woods. One looks like a woman who has got nothing to hide. The other looks like proof of everything they already believe." Ruth's jaw tightened. She was thinking. He could see it working behind her eyes. The strategic mind that had kept her alive for 3 years, calculating angles and risks and costs. "I have a child," she said. "If this goes wrong, I do not just lose. She loses. If you stay here, you have already lost." Harlan is not guessing anymore. He is looking, and the next people he sends will not be Bill Randall. Ruth stood, walked to the edge of the porch and back. Her leg was still splinted, and she moved with a limp that she tried to hide and could not. And the vulnerability of it was something Caleb knew she would hate if she could see herself. "Your girl deserves a bed," he said. "A table. A roof that does not leak. A chance to be 6 years old instead of a fugitive. That is not a kindness, Ruth. That is a fact. Do not use my daughter to make your argument. I am not using her. I am stating what we both know." She walked through a blizzard barefoot to find me. "Because you were hurt, and there was nobody else. No child should have to do that." Ruth's hands gripped the porch rail. Her knuckles were white. Inside the cabin, Josie was reading aloud to herself from one of the 3 books she owned, doing the voices with the concentrated effort of a child who had no audience but had decided long ago that stories were worth telling even if nobody was listening. Before Ruth could answer, the door burst open. Josie stood in the frame, face pale, eyes wide. "Mama, horses, coming down the ridge." Caleb turned. Through the trees, moving down the north slope in single file, 4 riders. Professional spacing, 15 yards between each horse. Tactical movement, not casual riding. These were not townsmen on an errand. These were men who knew how to approach a target. Caleb grabbed the Winchester from his saddle. Ruth was already inside, moving on the bad leg like the pain did not exist, reaching for the Springfield that hung above the door. "Josie, under the bed," Ruth said. "Not a request, a command. Do not come out until I say." Josie went. No tears, no argument. She slid under the bed with the rabbit in her arms and pulled the blanket down to hide herself. And the practiced efficiency of the movement told Caleb this was not the first time. Ruth propped herself against the door frame. The Springfield steadied on her shoulder. She sighted through the gap between the door and the frame with the calm focus of someone aiming at a target, not at men. Caleb positioned himself behind the woodpile to the left of the cabin. Good cover. Clear sight line to the north approach. He worked the lever on the Winchester and settled the stock against his shoulder. The riders came down through the timber, close enough now to see faces. 4 men, all armed. 2 carried rifles across their saddles. The other two had pistols on their hips. The lead rider was a big man with a black beard and a hat pulled low against the snow. The horse he rode was branded on the left shoulder, a P inside a circle. Prescott men. They cleared the tree line and spread out, moving to flank the cabin from two sides. Caleb let them come until they were within 50 yards, well inside rifle range, and then he stood. That is far enough. The riders pulled up. The bearded man squinted at Caleb. Who the hell are you? Caleb Morgan. This is my land. You are on it without invitation, and I am asking you to leave. We got business here. You got business with me. I own every acre from here to the ridge. Whatever you are looking for, you're looking on my property, and I did not give permission. The bearded man looked at his companions. A calculation passed between them. 3 against 1, they were thinking. Good odds. They were wrong about the odds. The Springfield cracked from the cabin doorway. A single shot. The bearded man's horse screamed and reared as the bullet struck the dirt 2 inches from its front hooves. A warning shot that could have been a killing shot, placed with the surgical precision of someone who wanted them to know the difference. The riders fought their panicking horses. The second man brought his rifle up, and Caleb fired twice. The first round hit the man's saddle horn and ricocheted with a sound like a bell being struck. The second passed close enough to his ear that he dropped the rifle entirely and grabbed the reins with both hands. Ruth fired again. The third rider's horse bolted sideways as the bullet struck a tree branch above his head, showering him with snow and bark. He did not try to bring his weapon up. He just rode. The fourth man had already turned his horse. The bearded man looked at the cabin doorway, then at Caleb, then back at the doorway. His face showed the particular confusion of a man who had expected a helpless woman and found a crossfire. Next one is higher, Caleb said. And hers will not miss. They rode, fast, not looking back. Hoofbeats fading up to the ridge until the forest swallowed them, and the hollow was silent again, except for the sound of gun smoke drifting and snow hissing on the cabin roof. Ruth stepped onto the porch. The Springfield was still raised, tracking the retreating riders until they disappeared. Her face was flat and still, her eyes cold as the November air. The splinted leg was forgotten entirely. Caleb looked at her. This woman who had just laid down fire like a cavalry soldier, who had placed her shots with the precision of a marksman, who stood in the cold with a broken leg and a smoking rifle and showed nothing on her face but readiness. "Your daddy teach you to shoot like that," he said. Ruth lowered the rifle. "My daddy taught me to survive. Shooting was just one part." Silence. The snow kept falling. "You cannot stay here," Caleb said. "They know the location now. Next time it is more men, and next time they come at night." Ruth looked at the cabin. The walls she had patched with her own hands. The garden she had grown from nothing. The herbs drying on the porch rail. The 3 years of invisible life she had built in a place nobody was supposed to find. "I know," she said. Josie crawled out from under the bed, face pale, dry-eyed, the rabbit in her arms. "Where do we go, Mama?" Ruth looked at Caleb, and he saw something in her face he had not seen before. Not trust, not yet. But the exhausted willingness to bet on a stranger because every other option had been spent. "His ranch," Ruth said. "Get your books." Josie did not ask twice. She gathered her 3 books, her charcoal, and the rabbit, and she walked out of the cabin that had been the only home she remembered with the steady stride of a child who had learned not to look back, because looking back meant you were not ready to go forward. Ruth packed the journal last. She wrapped it in oilcloth and tucked it inside her coat close to her body, where she could feel it against her ribs. Then she picked up the Springfield, stepped off the porch, and did not look back either. They rode out of the hollow in the dark. Caleb in front, Ruth behind him on his horse with Josie between them. The girl pressed against Caleb's back with her arms around his waist and her face buried in his coat. She was asleep before they reached the fence line, and the weight of her against him was so small and so heavy at the same time that Caleb had to clench his jaw to keep something inside his chest from breaking loose. Caleb Morgan's house had never smelled like biscuits at 5 in the morning. never held the sound of a child reading aloud to a barn cat. Never known a woman's hands reorganizing his medicine cabinet with the furious patience of someone trying very hard not to say, "How have you survived this long, with one roll of moldy bandage and a bottle of whiskey you are pretending is for medicinal purposes?" The house had never been alive, and Caleb had never been this afraid, because now he had something to lose. The first morning, Ruth made biscuits, not because she wanted to, because the kitchen was a disaster, and cooking was the fastest way to establish territory without having to talk about it. She moved through the space on her bad leg with the focused efficiency of a woman who could not afford to waste a single step. And inside an hour, she had reorganized the pantry, scrubbed the stove, and produced a pan of biscuits so tall and golden that Caleb sat at the table and stared at them like he had never seen food before. Josie ate two, asked for a third. Ruth drank her coffee standing up, too wound tight to sit, her eyes moving from window to window like she was counting exits. "You set 3 places," she said. Caleb looked at the table. 3 plates, 3 cups, 3 forks, a jar of dried wildflowers Josie had found in the barn and stuffed into a tin can because he did not own a vase. "There are 3 of us," he said. "I know, She pressed her lips together. "Nobody set a place for me since Samuel." He poured her more coffee. She drank it. The conversation was over, but something had started that neither of them had words for yet. The days that followed were a kind of dance. 2 people who had been alone so long they had forgotten the choreography of sharing space, moving around each other with the careful attention of dancers learning a new routine. Caleb went about his ranch work. Ruth took over the house with an authority that was half housekeeping and half fortification. She inventoried every supply, cataloged every weakness, and cleaned every surface with the intensity of a woman preparing for a siege. On the second day, Ruth reorganized the kitchen cabinets and found 2 place settings at the back, gathering dust behind a sack of cornmeal. Good china, Caleb's and Jacob's. Their mother had bought them years ago, and after Jacob died, Caleb had shoved them out of sight, because seeing them meant one was empty. Ruth did not ask about them. She washed both sets and put them back on the shelf where they belonged, where Caleb could see them. She did not explain why, and he did not ask, but the next morning when he opened the cabinet and saw them there, clean and visible, something that had been locked tight inside his chest shifted half an inch. On the third day, Caleb taught Josie to ride. The girl had never been on a horse, never had the chance. But she approached the big bay gelding the way she approached everything, with that still, measuring look followed by a decisiveness that would have been terrifying in an adult and was merely astonishing in a 6-year-old. She fell 3 times, got up 3 times, did not cry. The 4th time she started to slip, Caleb caught her, one arm around her waist, lifting her back into the saddle before she hit the ground. Josie stared at him with an expression he could not immediately read. Then he understood. She was surprised. Not surprised that she had been caught. Surprised that someone had been paying attention enough to catch her. "Not used to that, are you?" he said. Josie settled herself in the saddle and picked up the reins. "Mama tries, but she cannot always be everywhere." "Well, I am not everywhere either. But I am right here." Josie looked at him for a long moment. Then she kicked the horse forward and rode in a circle around the corral without falling off, and the grin on her face was so wide and so unguarded that it looked like it belonged to a completely different child. A child who had never had to learn to cry in silence, or walk barefoot through blizzards, or hide under beds while men with guns came looking. Ruth watched from the porch. Caleb caught her eye once and saw something complicated there. Fear and hope and grief, and the particular pain of a mother watching her daughter discover happiness and knowing how easily it could be taken away. Later that day, Ruth bandaged a cut on Caleb's hand where he had caught it on a wire fence staple. She washed the wound with boiled water, packed it with a green paste from one of her jars, and wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth. Her fingers were cool and precise, and when the bandaging was done, Her hand stayed on his wrist a moment longer than necessary. She noticed at the same time he did, pulled away, but slower than she would have yesterday. Neither of them mentioned it. That afternoon, Josie broke. She had been quiet all day. Quieter than usual, which for Josie was saying something. Ruth asked twice if she was all right. Josie said she was fine. Fine in the way that children say fine when they are anything but. Then, sitting on the kitchen floor with her charcoal and a piece of paper, while Ruth prepared supper and Caleb cleaned his rifle at the table, Josie said, "I cannot remember Papa Samuel's face." Ruth's hand stopped moving on the cutting board. Caleb set down the rifle. Josie looked at the charcoal in her hand. "I tried to draw him, but I cannot see him anymore. I remember his hands were big, and he sang bad. And he called you Ruthie, and you pretended you did not like it. But I cannot see his face, Mama. I try, and it will not come." She cried. Not the silent crying she had learned. Loud, messy, 6-year-old crying. Snot and tears and gasping sobs that shook her whole body. The kind of crying that comes when a dam breaks and everything behind it rushes out at once. Ruth was beside her in a second, on the floor pulling Josie into her lap, rocking her. "Mama's here, baby. I am here." Caleb did not know what to do. He was not this girl's father. He was barely an acquaintance. He had no right to this grief and no experience with it, and no idea whether his presence was a comfort or an intrusion. He sat on the floor beside them, not touching, just present. And he said the only thing he could think of that might help. "Tell me about him, so I can remember for you." Josie looked at him through tears. "He had big hands," she said. "And he whistled while he did chores. And he picked Mama up and spun her in the kitchen, and she would say, 'Put me down, Samuel, you fool.' But she was laughing. She was always laughing when he was around." Ruth's face was buried in Josie's hair. Her shoulders shook once, then steadied. "He sounds like a good man," Caleb said. "He was the best," Josie said. "And somebody took him, and I cannot even remember his face anymore." "Then we will remember the other parts," Caleb said. "The parts that matter more than a face. The hands and the whistling, and the way he made your mama laugh. Those are the parts of a person that stick. Those are the parts worth keeping." Josie cried herself out. Ruth held her the whole time. And Caleb sat beside them on the kitchen floor and did not say anything else, because sometimes the best thing a man can do is shut his mouth and stay. After Josie fell asleep that night, cried out and exhausted, Ruth sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she was not drinking and said, "You did not have to do that. I know. Most men would have left the room. I am not most men." Ruth looked at him. The armor was down just for a second. Underneath it, she was tired and scared and grieving and grateful, and all of those things were fighting for space on a face that was used to showing nothing. "Thank you," she said, "for sitting." He nodded. That was enough. But the day was not done with them. Doc Mendez arrived at the ranch just before dark, riding hard, his horse lathered. He had news, and it was not good. "Dale Whitmore," Doc said. "He is in Stillwater." Caleb went still. "Who is Dale Whitmore?" "A man who does things for money that most people would not do for free. Hired gun, professional, cold as a January well." Doc's face was grave, the humor stripped away entirely. "I have seen his kind before, viejo, down in the border wars. He is the man you call when you want a problem to stop being a problem permanently." Prescott sent for him. "Prescott does not hire a man like Whitmore to scout. She hires him to finish." The words settled over the kitchen like a cold front. Ruth stood in the doorway, having heard everything. Her face was stone, but her hand rested on the doorframe, and Caleb could see her fingers trembling. "How long?" she said. Doc looked at her. "Days, maybe. A week at most. These men work fast once they have a target." Ruth nodded. The trembling stopped. The armor came back up, quick and complete, like a wall being rebuilt in real time. She turned and went inside without another word. And Caleb heard her checking the Springfield, the metallic sounds of a woman preparing for war. That night, Josie disappeared. Ruth called her name at bedtime and got no answer. Checked the bedroom, the kitchen, the porch. Nothing. Called again, louder, the edge of her voice going sharp with the particular panic of a mother who has spent 4 years knowing that the worst can happen because the worst already has. Caleb checked the barn, the creek, the corral. Nothing. Ruth came out of the house, moving fast on her bad leg, not caring about the pain, screaming Josie's name into the dark, with a voice that cracked on every syllable. She was not Ruth, the frontier survivor, in that moment. She was not the woman who shot at armed riders without flinching. She was a mother, terrified, unraveling at the edges. Caleb found the tracks. Small, bare feet in the snow, heading east, toward the hollow. He rode hard, pushed the horse through dark timber and frozen brush until he broke into the clearing and saw the cabin. Light flickered inside. A candle, small and low. He found Josie inside, crouched beside the bed, pulling something from under a loose floorboard. A rag doll. Cloth body, button eyes, hair made from yarn. Small and battered and loved to the point of disintegration. "Papa Samuel made it for me," Josie said. "I forgot to bring it. I could not sleep without it." Caleb knelt beside her. His heart was hammering and his hands were shaking with the adrenaline of the ride, but he kept his voice steady. "You scared your mama, Josie. You cannot do that. I know. I am sorry. But I needed him." She held the doll against her chest the way she had held the rabbit that first day, like something precious, like something that could be taken. Caleb looked around the cabin, and his blood went cold. The shelves had been torn down, every jar smashed or emptied, the floorboards pried up in 3 places, the mattress slashed open, stuffing pulled out and scattered. Someone had searched this cabin. Methodically, professionally, every surface, every hiding place, every possible location for a book or a document or anything worth hiding. They were looking for the journal. He brought Josie home. Ruth grabbed her daughter and held her so hard the girl squeaked. Then Ruth looked at Caleb over Josie's head, and the fear in her eyes was not the fear of a woman who has lost track of her child. It was the fear of a woman who knows the hunters have found the trail. "They know about the book," she said. Late that night, after the house was quiet and Josie was sleeping with the rag doll clutched in her fist, Caleb walked the perimeter. North fence, west fence, south fence, east fence. 1/4 mile out in every direction, checking for tracks, for signs, for anything that did not belong. At the north fence, he found a cigarette butt. Still warm, fresh tobacco. Someone had been sitting there watching the ranch house. Patient, professional. The kind of patience that does not come from curiosity. The kind that comes from a man who is paid to wait. He pocketed the cigarette butt and walked back to the barn. He was halfway there when he realized he was not alone. Ruth stood in the shadow of the barn wall, Springfield raised, perfectly still. She had heard him coming and positioned herself to cover the approach. "Tobacco smoke," she whispered. "North side. Someone is out there." They stood shoulder to shoulder in the cold, 2 silhouettes staring into a larger darkness. And Caleb thought, "This is the woman I will fight beside, not the woman I fight to protect. Beside. That difference changes everything." The fire started at 2 in the morning. Not the house, the barn. And when Caleb charged into the dark, he knew it was not an accident. It was an invitation. He smelled it before he saw it. That particular tang of coal oil on dry wood, the accelerant catching fast and spreading faster. By the time he pulled his boots on and grabbed the Winchester, the south wall of the barn was fully engaged, orange light pouring through the gaps between boards and the horses screaming inside. He hit the barn door at a dead run. The heat pushed him back like a hand on his chest. He pulled his bandana over his face and went in anyway, because there were 3 horses in that barn, and a man who abandons his stock to fire is a man who has given up on everything. And Caleb Morgan was done giving up. He got the first 2 horses out by their halters, half dragging, half carrying them through smoke so thick he could not see his own hands. The 3rd horse, Jacob's old mare, was down in her stall, wild-eyed and kicking. He cut the rope, grabbed her mane, and hauled her up by sheer will and the strength of a man running on adrenaline and fury. They came out of the barn together, the mare stumbling and Caleb coughing so hard his ribs ached. And that is when the blow came. From the side, out of the dark, a rifle butt to his left side that cracked something deep in his chest and dropped him to his knees, a boot to his jaw. Stars. Then a knee on his chest, pressing him into the frozen ground while the barn burned behind him, and the horses ran, and the world narrowed to the weight of a man on top of him, and the cold metal of a rifle barrel pressed under his chin. The face above him was calm, clean-shaven, eyes the color of creek water in January, no anger, no emotion of any kind. The face of a man doing a job the way other men shoe horses or mend fences, professional, detached, efficient. Dale Whitmore did not introduce himself. He did not need to. The woman and the book, Whitmore said. His voice was flat, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. You have 3 days. After that, I stop knocking. He lifted the knee from Caleb's chest, took the Winchester, stood, turned, and walked into the darkness with the unhurried stride of a man who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Ruth's voice from the porch, a shout, sharp, followed by the distinctive metallic sound of the Springfield's hammer being cocked. But Whitmore was already gone, dissolved into the dark the way smoke dissolves into air. There, one moment, nothing the next. Ruth found Caleb on the ground. Ribs broken, at least 2, maybe 3. A deep laceration above his left eye where the rifle butt had split the skin. His jaw was already swelling, and when he tried to stand, his left side screamed with a pain that whited out his vision. "Do not move," Ruth said. She was on her knees beside him, hands already working, checking his ribs by feel, pressing gently along each one, mapping the damage with fingers that were as steady as surgical instruments. Inside. Now. He leaned on her and they made it to the kitchen. She cleared the table with one sweep of her arm, dishes and cups crashing to the floor, and laid him down on the bare wood. Then she lit every lamp in the room and went to work. This was when Caleb saw what Ruth Calloway really was. Not an herb woman, not a folk healer, a surgeon. She cleaned the head wound with boiled water and carbolic acid from a brown bottle she had brought from the cabin. She stitched it closed with silk thread and a curved needle, her stitches as even and precise as a seamstress working on fine fabric. She bound his ribs with strips of boiled cotton, wrapping tight enough to stabilize, but not so tight that he could not breathe. She checked his pupils, his pulse, the way he tracked her finger with his eyes. She worked for over an hour. Caleb drifted in and out, and each time he surfaced, her face was there, focused, calm. The face of a woman doing the thing she was born to do, in a world that had decided women were not allowed to do it. When she finished, she washed her hands in the basin, dried them on a clean cloth, looked at him lying on the kitchen table with his ribs bound and his face stitched and said, "You will live, Bill, but you will wish you had not for about 2 weeks." Then she walked to the far side of the kitchen, sat on the floor with her back against the stove, and shook. Full-body tremors that started in her hands and moved outward until her whole frame was vibrating like a plucked wire. She pressed her palms flat against the floor, trying to stop it, and could not. Josie found her. The girl appeared in the doorway, silent as always, and took in the scene with those measuring eyes. Blood on the table. Her mother shaking on the floor. The smell of carbolic acid and smoke. Josie did not speak. She walked to her mother, sat down beside her, and put her head on Ruth's shoulder. Ruth's arm came up automatically, pulling the girl close. They sat there in the lamplight, mother and daughter, and the trembling slowly stopped. In the morning, Caleb woke in the bed they had moved him to sometime in the night. Every breath was a knife between his ribs. His jaw was swollen to twice its normal size. The cut above his eye throbbed with a heat that meant infection if he was not careful. He swung his legs off the bed and tried to stand, made it halfway before the pain drove him back down. Ruth appeared in the doorway. She had the Springfield in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She handed him the coffee and blocked the door with her body. "Where do you think you're going?" she said. "After him. You walk out that door with cracked ribs, you die." And then Josie and I are alone again, except this time the man hunting us knows exactly where we are. So sit down, eat, and then we plan like grown people, not like someone who wants to be a dead hero. Caleb drank the coffee. It burned going down and hit his stomach like a fist, and for some reason it was the best thing he had ever tasted. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed, not close, but not far. She looked at him with an expression that mixed anger and worry, and something else, something she was clearly not ready to name. "Tell me about Jacob," she said. Caleb set down the cup. It was not a request, it was an exchange. She had given him a piece of her story in the cabin. Now she was asking for his. "Jacob was my younger brother," Caleb said. 10 years between us. I raised him more than our folks did. They died when he was 12. Fever took them both the same winter. I was already riding for the Marshal Service by then. Brought him along, taught him the trade. He was better at it than me, more patient, more honest, the kind of lawman who believed the badge meant something. Caleb's voice was flat, the same flat Ruth went to when the thing she was saying hurt too much for inflection. 2 years ago he came to me, here at the ranch. I had been retired 3 years by then. Retired and drowning. The bottle was the only company I kept. Jacob sat at this kitchen table right where you are and told me something was wrong in Stillwater. Something big. Land fraud, forged signatures, powerful people involved. Ruth's face did not change, but her hand resting on the bed frame tightened. "He asked me to ride with him," Caleb said. "That night. Into the foothills. Follow a lead he had been working. He needed backup. He needed his brother." Caleb stopped. The words were coming hard now, ground out between his teeth like gravel. I said no. Told him I was tired. Told him it was not my fight anymore. Told him to leave it alone. I was halfway through a bottle of rye and feeling sorry for myself, and I did not want to put boots on and ride into the cold for something that was not my problem. He looked at his hands. The hands that had been too busy holding a whiskey glass to hold his brother's reins. Jacob rode alone that night. And he died alone. Ambushed in the foothills. They said it was road agents. Random. Bad luck. I knew it was not random. I knew it in my gut. But I was too broken and too drunk and too ashamed to do anything about it. So I buried him and wound his watch every night and counted days of silence and waited to die. Ruth was quiet for a long time. The cabin was still except for the sound of Josie reading to the barn cat in the next room, her voice rising and falling in the rhythms of a story that was probably the only normal thing in this house. "Now you know," Caleb said. "You know why I came when your girl found me. It was not just kindness. It was guilt. She asked me to ride, and I said yes. Because the last time someone asked me to ride and I said no, they died for it. I will carry that until they put me in the ground." Ruth nodded, slow, understanding. "Now you know why I cannot let anyone help me," she said. "Because the last person I trusted to do the right thing did not. My husband trusted a town, a deputy, a system, and the system killed him and blamed me for it." They looked at each other across the narrow bed, two people whose grief was built on the same foundation. The belief that they should have done more and did not. That afternoon, Doc Mendez arrived to check on Caleb. He brought gauze, laudanum, and news. "Porter McBride's stable was burned last night," Doc said. "Same time as yours. Same coal oil. Same message. His horses are dead. All of them. 4 animals he raised from foals. His wife is in hysterics and his children are terrified. Same man, Caleb said, same employer. Doc's face was grim. Porter got a note nailed to his gate this morning. 1 word, silence, with a period. That is all. Caleb lay back against the pillow, thought about the bruises on his body, thought about the way Whitmore moved, the efficiency, the calm, the way he hit like a man who had been trained to hit, not by bar fights, but by something more disciplined. Doc, he said, the man who did this, he fights like military, or something close to it. I noticed the bruise patterns when I cleaned you up, Doc said. Square impacts, not round, rifle butt, not fist, not... The kicks were placed, not wild. Kidneys, solar plexus, temple. He knows anatomy, or at least he knows where to hurt a man. That night, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed with Jacob's watch in his hand, ribs screaming, face throbbing, but his mind clear for the first time in 2 years. I found something, Jake, he said to the empty room. I do not know what yet. But the woman your letter mentioned, she is real. She is here. And whatever you died trying to uncover, she has got the other half of it. He wound the watch, listened to it tick. I will not say no this time, whatever it costs. Ruth opened the journal on the kitchen table at midnight, and the secrets inside smelled like ink and gunpowder, and the 4 years of her life she had spent making sure no one ever read them. She was about to show them to a man she had known for 10 days. Either this was the bravest thing she had ever done, or the last mistake she would ever make. She honestly could not tell the difference anymore. Caleb sat across from her. His ribs were bound, his face swollen, one eye half closed from the stitched cut above it. He looked like a man who had lost a fight with a mountain. But his eyes were clear and steady, and his hands were flat on the table in front of him, waiting. Josie was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet except for the wind outside and the ticking of Jacob's watch on the mantelpiece, counting seconds that none of them could afford to waste. Ruth unfolded the oilcloth wrapping. Inside, the journal, leather-bound, brass lock, the leather worn soft from handling. She had carried this book against her body for 4 years, through a 3-hour walk in the dark with bleeding feet, through 3 winters in a hidden cabin, through every moment of terror and isolation, and the slow, grinding endurance of a life built entirely around keeping this one thing safe. She turned the key in the lock. The mechanism was small but well made, and it opened with a click that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. Samuel started writing this 6 months before he died, she said. He was a surveyor, worked for the county assessor's office. His job was measuring land and recording boundaries. Simple work, honest work, until he started noticing that the boundaries he was recording did not match the boundaries that had been filed. She opened the journal and turned it so Caleb could see. The pages were dense with Samuel's handwriting. Small, neat, precise. The writing of a man who measured things for a living and brought that precision to everything he did. Maps, dates, names, columns of figures, copies of documents made in careful duplicate. 12 homesteads, Ruth said. Small ranchers, most of them. Families who had filed claims and worked the land for years. Their deeds were refiled at the county clerk's office with forged signatures transferring ownership to holding companies that all traced back to one family. She turned a page. Caleb saw a list of names. Families. The Hendersons, the Carters, the Doyles, the Watkins. 12 families in all. Beside each name, a date and an amount. The amounts were not large individually, but together they added up to something staggering. $53,000, Caleb said, in stolen land. Ruth nodded. In an 1880s territory where a working ranch might sell for a few $100s, $53,000 was a fortune. The kind of fortune that could buy a town, or a deputy, or the silence of everyone who might have stopped it. Caleb turned more pages, and then he stopped. One entry, circled 3 times in red ink. Deputy Harlan, present at county clerk's office on the dates of 7 separate filings. Witness to forgeries. Complicit. Harlan, Caleb said. Harlan. Ruth's voice was flat. He was not just covering for Prescott after Samuel died. He was in it from the beginning. Every forged signature, every stolen homestead. Harlan was there as the legal witness. His badge made it look legitimate. Caleb pushed back from the table. His ribs protested, and he ignored them. He crossed the kitchen and pulled Jacob's map from the wall where he had pinned it days ago, carried it back to the table, laid it beside the open journal. 3 land parcels circled in red on Jacob's map. Caleb looked at the journal, looked at the map. The 3 red circles matched 3 of the 12 stolen homesteads. Exactly. Jacob was investigating the same thing, Caleb said. Ruth was quiet for 3 heartbeats. Then she said, "I know." The words hit Caleb like a second blow to his broken ribs. He looked up from the map. Ruth met his eyes without flinching. "You knew. How long? Since you showed me the map, the night you found the envelope in Jacob's trunk. You pinned it to the wall, and I saw the parcels when I came through the kitchen the next morning. I recognized them immediately. That was 4 days ago. You have known for 4 days, and you did not tell me. I needed to be sure you were not part of it." Caleb's jaw tightened. The muscles stood out along his neck. His hands, flat on the table, curled into fists, and then released. Slowly. "You thought I was part of the scheme that killed my own brother." Ruth did not look away. "I thought my husband was safe in his own town. I was wrong about that, too. I do not get to be wrong about you. Not with Josie." Silence. Heavy. The kind that either breaks something or builds it. They were balanced on the edge, and both of them knew it. Then Ruth turned to a page near the back of the journal, one she had bookmarked with a strip of fabric. She pushed it across the table. "Samuel wrote this 3 weeks before he died," she said. "Read it." Caleb read, and the blood drained from his face. Samuel's entry described a contact he had made, another man investigating the Prescott land scheme independently. Someone who had arrived at the same evidence from a different direction. Samuel had been cautious. He did not use the man's full name, only a notation. CM's brother, the young one, the idealist. "He has the surveyor maps from the north parcels. We are building the same case from different ends. If we combine what we have, it is enough for the territorial marshal." CM Caleb Morgan, the young one, the idealist, Jacob. Caleb read the entry 3 times. Each time the letters sharpened and the room blurred, and the ticking of Jacob's watch on the mantelpiece sounded louder and louder, until it was all he could hear. Jacob and Samuel were working together, Ruth said, passing information, building a case that would have brought the Prescotts down, and they were both killed within months of each other because the case was getting close. Caleb sat back. The chair creaked. The chair. He pressed his hands against his eyes and breathed. In and out, counting the way he counted days of silence, forcing himself to stay in the room instead of retreating into the dark place where grief lived. When he dropped his hands, his eyes were red but dry. "They killed them both," he said. "Samuel first, then Jacob. Same reason. Same people. Same employer," Ruth said quietly. "And the same method. Someone they hired, someone professional." The word professional hung in the air between them, and both of them thought about Dale Whitmore, asleep somewhere in Stillwater, waiting for his 3 days to expire. Caleb looked at the journal, then at the map, then at Ruth. "We have to get this to Helena, the territorial marshal. It is enough. Samuel's evidence and Jacob's maps together. It is enough to bring arrest warrants for Prescott and Harlan both. I know. That is why I have kept it alive for 4 years. That is why I have hidden and starved and taught my daughter to cry without sound. Because this book is the only weapon I have, and if I lose it, Samuel died for nothing." Caleb was quiet. Then he said something that surprised them both. "Marry me." Ruth stared at him. "If we are married, Josie has a legal father, a stable home, a family name that Prescott cannot dismantle with petitions and rumors. Virginia Prescott has already filed custody concerns with the territorial office. Marriage is the strongest wall the law allows, and right now, walls are what we need. Ruth's face was a war. Fury and fear and something underneath both that she was clearly not ready to acknowledge. I will not marry a man I do not. She stopped, did not finish the sentence. The unfinished word hung between them louder than anything she had said all night. I am not asking for love, Caleb said. I am asking for partnership. Your terms, your pace, whatever this is or is not. You decide. After. Ruth looked at the journal, at her hands, at the table between them. When the dust settles, she said, I choose what this becomes. Not you, not the law, me, you, nobody else. She nodded. Once. And the nod contained everything that words had not been able to carry. Yes. And terror. And the smallest, most fragile thread of hope, held so carefully it might have been made of glass. They did not touch, did not seal the agreement with anything as simple as a handshake or a kiss. They sat across from each other at a kitchen table with a dead man's journal between them, and made a deal that was half legal strategy and half something neither of them had the courage to name. Then Caleb went to bed, because his ribs were screaming and his face was on fire, and the enormity of what he had just done was settling over him like snow. Ruth did not go to bed. She sat at the table with the journal and the map and the truth that Jacob and Samuel had been connected, that the conspiracy was bigger and older and more deliberate than she had imagined, and all of it crashed into the wall she had built over 4 years of surviving alone. A thought came. Poisonous, irrational, unstoppable. He is using you. He does not want you. He wants the journal. He wants vengeance for Jacob. You are a means to an end, just like everyone else, just like always. She knew it was not true. She knew it. She had watched this man sit on a kitchen floor and ask a 6-year-old girl to tell him about her dead father. She had watched him set a bone with trembling hands because he was trying so hard to be gentle. She had watched him leave his own gun on her table and walk into the snow unarmed because he trusted her more than he trusted himself. But knowing and believing are different countries, and Ruth had been exiled from trust for too long to cross back on logic alone. At 3 in the morning, she woke Josie. Packed the journal, the Springfield, 3 days of food. Took 1 horse, rode east in the dark toward the hollow. Back to the cabin, back to hiding. She left nothing behind. No note, no explanation, nothing. Caleb woke to silence. Wrong silence. The kind that has a hole in it where sound should be. He checked the guest rooms. Empty. The kitchen. Cold. The barn. 1 horse gone. He stood in the pre-dawn dark and felt the emptiness of his house resettle around him like snow filling a grave. She was gone. And he understood why. Which was the worst part. He understood completely. He did not follow. Ruth Calloway sat in the cold cabin she had fled to and waited for the relief to come. The familiar safety of walls she knew, ground she had mapped, solitude she had mastered. She waited for the relief, and it did not come. What came instead was her daughter's voice in the dark, asking the one question Ruth had no answer for. Mama, why do we always run away from the good ones? The cabin was wrecked. Shelves torn down from the earlier search, floorboards ripped up, the mattress gutted. Ruth rebuilt the fire with hands that would not stop shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper, the particular tremor of a person who has just destroyed the first good thing that has happened to them in 4 years, and knows exactly what they have done, and cannot explain why. Josie sat on the stripped bed frame, holding her rag doll, watching her mother with eyes that had stopped measuring. They were just sad. I want to go back, Josie said. We cannot. Why? Because I cannot trust. Cannot trust who? Caleb? He caught me when I fell off the horse. He sat on the floor and asked me to tell him about Papa Samuel. He sleeps on the hard cot by the door so we can have the warm rooms. He counts his dead brother's watch at night. And he does not know I hear him, but I do. I hear him say, "Good night, Jake," every single night. Ruth's hands stopped shaking. She looked at her daughter. "Baby, you do not understand what I am. I understand you are scared. I have been scared my whole life, Mama. I know what it looks like." Her voice was steady. "But Caleb is not the one who threw rocks at us. He is not the one who made us run. He is the one who came when I asked. And you are running from him, like he is one of them." Josie held the rag doll tighter. "I am tired, Mama. I am tired of being scared. I am tired of running. I am tired of hiding in places where nobody knows my name. I want to go back. I want the biscuits and the barn cat and the horse he is teaching me to ride. I want to go where there are windows that are not broken and a table with 3 plates. I want to stop running." Ruth pressed her hands against her face. Behind her palms, the darkness was absolute, and inside that darkness she could see every choice she had ever made. The ones that kept them alive and the ones that kept them afraid, and the thin, trembling line between the two. She had run because running was all she knew, because every person who had ever been kind to her had eventually used that kindness as a weapon. Because the pattern was etched so deep it felt like truth, and truth was the only armor she had left. But her daughter was asking her to take the armor off, and her daughter was 6 years old, and braver than anyone Ruth had ever met, including herself. Dawn came gray and cold. Ruth stood outside the wrecked cabin and looked west. She could not see the ranch from here, but she knew where the chimney smoke would be because she had watched it every night for 3 years. That smoke had been her lifeline, her proof that the world held something beyond survival. The only light she could see from the bottom of the dark well she had dug for herself. Now the real thing was 8 miles away. A man with broken ribs and a stitched face sitting at a kitchen table, drinking cold coffee, not following her. Because following would be control. And he understood somehow, without being told, that she had been controlled enough. She loaded the horse, woke Josie, who had fallen asleep on the bare bed frame with the rag doll pressed against her chest. They rode west. Caleb was at the kitchen table. He had not moved. The coffee in his cup was cold. He had not slept, but he had not followed. He had sat in the empty house and waited because that was the only thing he could do that would mean anything. When he heard hoofbeats on the road, he did not get up. When the kitchen door opened, he did not turn. Ruth stood in the doorway, Josie behind her. "I ran because I thought you wanted the journal and not me." "I know." It was not true. I knew it was not true, even while I was saddling the horse. I know that, too. How? Because you came back. People running from the truth do not come back. Silence. Long enough for the clock to tick 7 times. Caleb counted. He counted everything now. "I am going to do that," Ruth said. "Probably more than once. Push you away when things get close. It is the only way I have known how to survive for 4 years, and it does not switch off because I want it to. Then I will be here when you come back, however many times it takes." Ruth sat down across from him. Caleb poured her coffee from the pot that had gone cold on the stove. She drank it cold. Neither of them said anything for a full minute. The silence was not empty. It was the fullest silence Caleb had experienced in 2 years. The silence of 2 people who had chosen to stay in the same room after every reason to leave. Then Ruth set down her cup and said, "We need to move. Now. Today." Whitmore gave 3 days and we have used 2. The evidence goes to Helena, or it dies with us. Caleb nodded. "We marry first. In Stillwater. In public. In front of every person who drove me out. In front of every person who needs to see you standing tall." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the window and looked out at the land that was white with snow and gray with dawn, and holding its breath the way the whole territory seemed to be holding its breath. "I will need an hour to sew something," she said. "Take 2. I do not need 2. Take them anyway. I need to talk to Doc." And Porter McBride. Ruth turned. Porter. Doc brought him in last night while you were gone. The burning of his stable finally broke something loose. He is ready to testify. Ruth, he has the original signed statement about Samuel's horse, the one Harlan buried. He kept a copy, hidden in his barn floor for 4 years, same as you kept the journal. Ruth's eyes filled. She blinked hard once, and the tears retreated. She would not let them fall. Not yet. There would be time for tears later, or there would not. Either way, right now there was work to do. Who else? Pearl Whitfield, the boarding house woman. She watched you walk out of Stillwater 4 years ago. Watched you bleeding, carrying Josie, and she closed her curtain and went back to bed. She has hated herself for it every day since. She will stand as witness for the wedding and sign anything we need her to sign. How do you know all this? Because I have not been sleeping. I have been riding. 3 nights while you thought I was checking fences, I was in town talking to people, Porter, Pearl, anyone who knew the truth and was too afraid to say it. Ruth stared at him. Her face was doing something complicated. Anger that he had gone behind her back. Gratitude that he had. And underneath both, the dawning realization that this man had been fighting for her in the dark, quietly, methodically, the same way she had been surviving in the dark for 4 years. "You should have told me," she said. "You are right. I should have. I am sorry. Do not apologize. Just do not do it again." She turned back to the window, and then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Thank you for not following me last night." She sewed through the night. Not a wedding dress. Armor. The pretty kind. Storm gray fabric from a bolt she had carried from Stillwater 4 years ago, saved for a reason she could not have named then but understood now. Careful stitches, clean lines, lace at the collar from her mother's wedding veil, carried across 1,000 miles and 4 years of hiding. When Caleb passed the guest room door at midnight, he heard the needle's rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, and then it changed, slowed, became something softer. She was humming, the same wordless melody Josie had told him about, the one she only hummed when she was not paying attention, the one that meant something inside her was beginning to heal whether she gave it permission or not. Caleb lay in the dark and listened, and the sound filled the empty house the way water fills a vessel that has been dry so long it forgot what holding something felt like. In the morning, Ruth emerged from the guest room carrying the dress. Simple, elegant, storm cloud gray with white lace at the collar. She had transformed fabric and thread and 4 years of waiting into something that said, "I am here, I survived, and I am not hiding anymore." She caught him looking and said, "It is not a wedding dress. It is a walking into battle dress. There is a difference. Looks like both to me. That is because you are a rancher. You think everything that is not covered in dirt is fancy." Josie appeared on the stairs, hair brushed, face scrubbed, wearing her best dress, which was also her only dress, holding the rag doll in one hand and a charcoal pencil in the other. "We look like a family," she said. Ruth's hand found Caleb's, quick, instinctive, like reaching for something solid when the ground shifts. She held it for 3 seconds, then let go and turned to the stove. "Nobody walks into battle hungry," she said. "Eat first." She made biscuits. The real kind. Tall and golden and so good, Caleb had to close his eyes on the first bite. "Ready?" he asked when the plates were cleared. Ruth looked at her daughter, looked at the dress she had sewn through the night, looked at the gold ring Caleb had bought from the Stillwater blacksmith 2 days ago, plain and solid and permanent, sitting on the table between them. "No," she said, "but I am going anyway. That is close enough." Ruth Calloway walked into Stillwater for the first time in 4 years, and the town went silent the way a room goes silent when a dead woman walks through the door. Because that is what she was to them, a ghost, a story, a cautionary tale mothers told daughters about the wages of sin. Except the ghost was wearing storm gray and standing straighter than any of them. and the story was about to change its ending. They pulled up in front of the territorial office in a wagon driven by Caleb, with Ruth beside him and Josie between them. Doc Mendez rode alongside on his gray mare. Porter McBride sat in the wagon bed, hat pulled low, jaw set, carrying a leather satchel that held 4 years of buried truth. The town gathered the way small towns do when something is about to happen, not invited, drawn. Bodies appearing in doorways and along boardwalks and at the edges of the street like iron filings pulled toward a magnet. Faces that Caleb recognized from the general store, the saloon, the church. Faces that ranged from curious to hostile to something that might have been shame dressed up as anger. Virginia Prescott stood on the boardwalk across from the territorial office, arms folded, face carved from stone. Beside her, Deputy Emmett Harlan, badge catching the gray November light. And behind them both, Thomas Prescott, the mayor, big through the shoulders with a face that looked reasonable until you studied the eyes. The machinery of judgment was already running. Virginia held a document in her hand. The custody petition. Signed, witnessed, ready to file. Caleb helped Ruth down from the wagon. Her hand gripped his hard enough to hurt, then released. She smoothed the storm-gray dress, touched the lace at her collar, drew one breath, then walked toward the territorial office like a woman who had forgotten how to be afraid or had simply decided that fear was not worth the time it cost. Josie walked beside her, not behind. Beside. Chin up, red hair catching the light, 6 years old and marching into enemy territory with the posture of someone who had been preparing for this her whole short life. Judge Callahan waited inside, lean, 60-something, impatient with formality and allergic to nonsense. He looked at them over the top of his spectacles and got straight to business. The ceremony was short, legal words in a legal voice. When Callahan asked Ruth if she took this man, she turned first to Josie, then to Caleb. "I do," she said, and meant it in ways the law could not measure. Pearl Whitfield stood as witness. Her hands shook, but her name on the register was clear and firm. Doc Mendez signed beside her, his signature as bold and unapologetic as everything else about him. Caleb slid the gold band onto Ruth's finger. She looked at it the way Josie had looked at the real bed the first morning at the ranch, like something impossible that had decided to be true. They stepped outside into cold sunlight and a crowd that had doubled. Virginia Prescott stepped off the boardwalk. "This is a mockery," she said. Her voice carried without shouting. It never needed to. This woman murdered her husband and fled justice. And now she has manipulated another man into providing cover for her crimes. Ruth did not wait to be attacked. She attacked first. She named the 3 men who had thrown rocks through her windows 4 years ago. Named them clearly, loudly, and watched them shrink in the crowd like salted slugs. She named the first person to call her a murderer. Named the preacher who had condemned her from his pulpit while she was still wearing black. Then she turned to Harlan. "Porter McBride wrote and signed a sworn statement the day after my husband died. It confirmed that the horse was green broke and should never have been ridden in a storm. You buried that statement, Deputy, but a copy exists. And right now, at this moment, it is on its way to the territorial marshal in Helena." Harlan's hand moved to his sidearm, not drawing, resting, the instinct of a cornered animal. Caleb stepped in front of Ruth. Doc Mendez moved to his right, and from the back of the wagon, Porter McBride stood up, tall, lean, carrying 4 years of guilt and silence on his shoulders, and finally putting them down. 3 men facing a deputy whose hand was trembling. "Squeeze that trigger, Frank," Caleb said, "in front of the judge, the town, and God. Show everybody who you really are." Harlan did not fire. He looked at the faces around him. The judge in the doorway, the townspeople watching, the shift that was happening, slow as a tide turning as people began to recalculate what they knew and what they had been told and the distance between the two. He holstered the weapon, stepped back, and the whole town watched him retreat. Virginia did not retreat. Her voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. The petition stands. A hearing will determine this child's welfare regardless of whatever performance you have arranged today. Ruth turned to her, and something in Ruth's face shifted. Not anger, not triumph. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like recognition. I know about your son, Virginia. I know you lost William when he was 12. I know what that kind of grief does because I have lived it, and I am sorry for it, truly. But my daughter is not your second chance. She is not your redemption. She is mine. Virginia's composure cracked. Just a flash. One terrible second where the granite face showed everything she had been hiding behind the petitions and the moral authority and the cold certainty. A mother's grief, raw and bottomless and never healed. Then the granite returned. Virginia turned and walked away, not defeated, not apologizing, but walking, which was more retreat than anyone in Stillwater had ever seen from her. There was no time to rest. Caleb loaded the wagon within the hour. They rode for Helena immediately. Caleb, Ruth, Josie, and Doc Mendez. Porter McBride followed separately on a different route, carrying a copy of the evidence as insurance. The blizzard hit 30 minutes out of Stillwater. The worst storm in a decade, screaming down from the mountains like it had been waiting for them. They abandoned the wagon within 2 hours and transferred to horseback. Snow reached the stirrups. Wind cut visibility to nothing. Josie went quiet first, then pale. Then her lips turned blue and Ruth's voice changed from steady to sharp, the voice of a mother recognizing hypothermia in her child. They sheltered in a rock overhang. Ruth worked on Josie with herbs and body heat, and the fierce, focused intensity of a woman who would fight God himself to keep her daughter breathing. Caleb held the girl against his chest while Ruth wrapped blankets around them both, and Josie's heartbeat against his broken ribs was the most painful and most necessary thing he had ever felt. The girl warmed, slowly. Her color came back. Her breathing steadied. She opened her eyes and said, "I am cold, Papa. Papa." The word hit Caleb like a bullet. Not because it was unexpected. Because it was the first time she had said it. And she said it the way you say a word you have been practicing in secret, hoping for the right moment. "I know, sweetheart," he said. "I know you are cold." They huddled together through the night. 3 bodies in a stone shelter while the storm raged. Ruth reached across Josie's sleeping form and found Caleb's hand. She held it. Neither spoke. The grip said everything that words had been too clumsy to carry. The second day, the storm broke and the pass opened. They rode hard. The ambush came at the narrowest point. Whitmore and 2 hired guns positioned above the trail on both sides. Classic crossfire. The kind of setup that kills before the target even knows it is a target. But Caleb had ridden this pass 100 times in his martial years. He knew every rock, every overhang, every side trail cut by deer and elk, and the occasional Nez Perce hunting party. He sent Ruth, Josie, and Doc through a narrow cut in the rock face that did not look like a trail unless you had been born knowing it was there. Then he turned his horse and rode straight at the ambush. Not because he was brave, because he was the only one who could draw their fire long enough for the others to get through. And 2 years ago he had said no when someone needed him to say yes, and he would not make that mistake again. Not for Jacob, not for Ruth, not for the 6-year-old girl who had just called him Papa. The gunfight was not pretty. It was not cinematic. It was 2 men shooting at each other from behind rocks in the snow, while 2 hired guns tried to flank and failed because Caleb had spent 30 years learning how terrain wins fights that speed and numbers cannot. One hired gun took a bullet through the thigh and went down screaming. The other watched his partner fall and decided that whatever Prescott was paying was not enough to die for. He rode. Whitmore stayed. They faced each other across 40 yards of snow and rock, Caleb behind a boulder, Whitmore behind a fallen pine. The wind had died and the air was still, and the only sounds were their breathing and the distant scream of the wounded man. Caleb spoke. 2 years ago. Copper Creek Pass. You ambushed a man named Jacob Morgan. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then, I have ambushed a lot of men. He was my brother. Silence. Then Whitmore moved. Fast, professional, breaking from cover to gain a better angle. Caleb tracked him and fired. The bullet caught Whitmore's gun hand and the pistol spun away into the snow. Whitmore stumbled against a boulder, clutching his shattered hand, teeth bared. Caleb came out from cover, walked across the open ground with the Colt leveled at Whitmore's face. 30 feet, 20, 10. He stood over the man who had killed his brother. Whitmore looked up at him, and Caleb saw something he did not expect. Not fear, not defiance. Whitmore's eyes flickered toward the side trail where Josie had disappeared. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of the child seeing it. Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. He saw Jacob, not dying, living. Jacob laughing so hard, coffee came out his nose. Jacob trying to sing a hymn and getting every note wrong. Jacob sitting at this kitchen table saying, "You have always been too serious, Caleb. Live a little." Killing Whitmore would not bring Jacob back. It would only turn Caleb into something Jacob would not recognize. Something that could not sit at a kitchen table with a 6-year-old girl and eat burned eggs and laugh about it. From somewhere down the trail, faint in the wind, a voice. Papa. Not the reason he lowered the gun. The confirmation of a decision he had already made. The voice did not save him from pulling the trigger. It reminded him that he had already chosen not to. He lowered the Colt, tied Whitmore to the boulder with rope from his saddle. And while tying the man's hands, he noticed the holster on Whitmore's belt. A distinctive maker's mark stamped into the leather. A small circle with a line through it. The mark of a leather worker in Butte, who made custom holsters for a specific clientele. Caleb had seen that mark before. On a scar in Jacob's saddle. A bullet gouge he had run his thumb over 1,000 times in 2 years without understanding what it meant. Now he understood. The same holster, the same maker, the same man. Whitmore's bullet in Jacob's saddle fired from a gun carried in a holster stamped with a mark that was now 6 inches from Caleb's hand. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The truth was there, physical, tangible, earned by his own eyes and his own memory. Not told to him by someone else. Found. He looked at Whitmore. Whitmore looked back. And for the first time, the hired gun's eyes showed something. He knew that Caleb knew. Prescott paid for both, Caleb said. Samuel Calloway and Jacob Morgan. You killed them both. Whitmore said nothing. You are going to tell that to a judge, Caleb said. Every detail, every dollar, every name. Or I will leave you tied to this rock in a blizzard and let God sort out your sins. Whitmore talked. Helena appeared through the morning fog like a promise made of wood and stone. Ruth rode beside Caleb, Josie on the saddle before her. Ruth's face was wind-burned, lips cracked, eyes red from the cold. She looked at him with the blood on his coat and the arm she had bandaged with torn fabric from her own shirt. Did you kill him? She asked. No. Why not? Because your daughter calls me Papa. And a papa is not a killer. Ruth looked at him one heartbeat longer. Then she leaned across the space between their horses, grabbed his collar, and kissed him. Not the courthouse kiss. This one tasted like blood and snow and cold coffee. And for the first time in 4 years, something that felt like the future. The hearing lasted 4 hours. What came after lasted the rest of their lives. Territorial Courthouse in Helena. Judge Thornton, a man with no patience for vendettas dressed as virtue, and no tolerance for lawmen who confuse their badge with permission. Porter McBride took the stand first. His voice shook at the start and steadied as he went. He presented his original sworn statement, the one he had written and signed the day after Samuel Calloway died. The horse was green broke. It had been lent to Samuel by Henderson, who knew full well the animal was not safe to ride in a storm. Porter had given the statement to Deputy Harlan. Harlan had buried it. 4 years, Porter said. I let my silence condemn an innocent woman because I was afraid. I am not afraid anymore. Or maybe I am, but I am more ashamed than I am afraid. And shame finally won. Dr. Mendez presented evidence that linked the bullet recovered from Jacob Morgan's saddle to the weapon carried by Dale Whitmore. Same caliber, same rifling marks, consistent with the holster maker's mark found on Whitmore's person. Then Whitmore himself, brought in under guard, gun hand bandaged, face blank. He confirmed under oath what he had told Caleb on the mountain. Thomas Prescott had paid him. Twice. First for Samuel Calloway, made to look like a riding accident. Then for Jacob Morgan, made to look like a road agent ambush. Harlan arranged the cover stories both times. The land fraud extended across 12 homesteads and was worth over $50,000. Ruth presented Samuel's journal last. She carried it to the witness stand herself, held it up for the judge to see, and said, "My husband died for what is in this book. I spent 4 years making sure it survived. And I would spend 40 more, if that is what it took." Judge Thornton reviewed the evidence. He did not deliberate long. The custody petition filed by Virginia Prescott was denied with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. Not today, not ever. Arrest warrants were issued for Deputy Emmett Harlan and Mayor Thomas Prescott. Harlan was charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. The kind of charges that meant a man walked into the territorial prison at Deer Lodge and did not walk out for 15 to 20 years. Prescott faced charges of land fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption of public office. The judge looked at Prescott as the charges were read and said, "You used your position to steal from the people you were elected to serve, and when someone discovered what you had done, you paid to have them killed. The territory will determine your sentence. I expect it will be severe." Ruth Calloway. Morgan was declared innocent of all suspicion. Entered permanently into the record. Cleared, publicly and completely, of the lie that had driven her into the wilderness for 4 years. When the judge said those words, Ruth did not move, did not cry, did not collapse. She sat very still in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her chin level. And the only thing that changed was her breathing. It slowed, deepened. The breathing of a person who has been holding their breath for 4 years and has finally been told they can let it go. Josie squeezed her mother's hand. Virginia Prescott sat in the courtroom as her husband was led away in chains. She did not rage, did not protest. She simply folded inward, and the woman underneath the granite was exactly what Ruth had recognized months ago. Not a monster. A mother. Broken by grief, twisted by loss, holding on to control because it was the only thing she had left after her son died, and the world kept turning without him. After the hearing, Ruth approached Virginia. The courtroom was nearly empty. Caleb watched from the back row but did not intervene. This was not his moment. The two women stood face to face. "I know what losing a child feels like," Ruth said. "I almost lost mine because of you. I am not going to pretend that is forgivable." Pause. "But I am not going to carry you either. You are not my burden. You are your own." Virginia said nothing for a long time. Then she met Ruth's eyes and nodded. Once. Not an apology. An acknowledgement. The bare, minimal recognition that something had happened and something had ended. It was enough. It had to be. Spring came to Montana the way it always did, slow and stubborn, and then all at once. The snow pulled back from the hills. The creek in the hollow ran full again. Wildflowers pushed through the dirt like promises the ground had been keeping all winter. The ranch came alive. A new barn went up in March, raised by neighbors who drove out from Stillwater to help. Some of them were the same people who had driven Ruth away 4 years earlier. They did not apologize with words. They apologized with hammers and nails, and the silent, sweating labor of people who knew they had been wrong, and did not know how to say it except by showing up. Ruth let them help, not because she forgave them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But because the barn needed building and grudges did not hold up a roof. Her clinic opened in April, set up in the converted tack room beside the barn. A proper space with a clean table and shelves lined with medicines she made herself and instruments ordered from a catalog in Chicago. People came. Not many at first, then more. A child with a fever from 2 valleys over. A rancher with a broken collarbone. A pregnant woman whose regular doctor was snowed in and who delivered a healthy boy on Ruth's table at 3 in the morning while Josie held the lamp steady, and Caleb boiled water and tried not to look like a man who was going to pass out. Folks did not come because they had forgiven Ruth. They came because their children were sick and their bones were broken, and the nearest doctor was 2 days away. Need dissolved grudges in a way that apology never could. And with each person Ruth healed, the story of what happened to her changed a little more. Not rewritten, revised. The way a town revises its memory when the truth becomes too heavy to ignore. Josie started school in May. She walked into the one-room schoolhouse in Helena with her books under one arm and the rag doll under the other, and told the teacher, "I can already read and do arithmetic and name 200 plants. My mama taught me. Where do I sit?" She made friends. Came home with stories about ordinary things, a boy who pulled her braid and got kicked in the shin for it, a spelling bee she won, a game of tag where she ran faster than everybody because 3 years of barefoot running through the Bitterroot Mountains had made her legs into something approaching miraculous. She was ordinary, and ordinary for Josie was a miracle. Caleb ran the ranch with the focus of a man who had remembered why work mattered, not as punishment, not as distraction, as building, adding something to the world instead of subtracting himself from it. He rebuilt fences and bred cattle and rode the land every morning, not counting days of silence anymore, but counting something else. Days since Josie had first called him Papa. 187, everyone worth counting. On a Tuesday evening in late May, Ruth found Caleb on the porch with Jacob's watch in his hand. She sat beside him, did not speak, just sat. The sun was setting behind the Bitterroot Range, painting the sky in colors that had no names in English but probably had names in some language spoken by people who had more time to watch sunsets and less reason to fear the dark that followed them. "I wound it every night since he died," Caleb said. 5 years, never missed a single night. Like if I kept it ticking, some part of him was still here. Maybe it was, maybe. He turned the watch over. Cracked glass, faithful hands, still counting time forward whether he wanted it to or not. Jake would have liked you, would have liked Josie, would have driven you both crazy with his terrible jokes and his worse singing. His voice thickened, but held. He would have told me to stop carrying his time and start living mine. Caleb opened the watch one last time, listened to the ticking. The small, steady sound of time passing, which is another way of saying the small, steady sound of life continuing. Then he closed it, pressed it to his lips, and set it on the porch rail. "Rest now, Jake. I am all right." Inside the house, Josie was reading aloud to the dog she had named Jacob. "Because he needs a good name, Papa. And you said Uncle Jake was good." She was reading Robinson Crusoe and doing all the voices wrong, which made them better. Ruth leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder. "Caleb." "Yeah, I love you." He went still, drew a breath that seemed to fill rooms he had forgotten he had. Rooms that had been boarded up and locked and abandoned and were now somehow full of light and air and the sound of a child reading to a dog. "Took you long enough," he said. "I had to be sure. And I am sure. I am sure that whatever this is, it is real and it is mine and nobody gets to take it." She lifted her head. "I love you. Not because you saved us. Because you saw us. Because you brought salt when we needed salt and books when we needed books and yourself when we needed someone to remind us that people could be good." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "I love you too. Have since about the third biscuit. That is a terrible love story. It is ours. I will take terrible. Josie's voice floated through the open door. Mama, the dog is asleep. I think my reading bored him. Can I have a biscuit? Ruth laughed. The sound carried across the porch and out over the land that had been a grave and become a garden. Caleb laughed too. And the sound of both of them together was something new in the world. The way spring is new, even though it has happened 1,000 times before. Because this spring was theirs. This laughter was theirs. This evening on this porch with this view and this child and this dog and this life was entirely, impossibly, undeniably theirs. Josie came through the door with something in her hand, a piece of paper, folded once. She handed it to Caleb with the ceremony of a child presenting something important. He unfolded it. A charcoal drawing, 3 figures, a woman. A small girl in the middle holding both their hands. And a man. This time the man had a face, eyes, a mouth that was smiling, a hand carefully drawn holding the little girl's hand. I finished it, Papa, Josie said. It took me a long time, but I finished it. Caleb looked at the drawing, looked at it for a long time, then he carried it inside and set it on the mantelpiece beside the wooden box that held Jacob's watch. 2 things on the shelf. The past laid to rest, the future drawn by a child's hand. He stood there for a moment, one hand on the mantelpiece. Ruth appeared beside him. Her arm went around his waist. Josie pushed between them both, wriggling into the space that had always been hers, the space between 2 people she had pulled together by walking barefoot through a blizzard, because she believed, with the unshakable faith of a child, that broken things could be fixed if you were brave enough to ask for help. Through the window, the chimney smoked above them. Steady, warm, real, not watched from a distance anymore. Not a signal of someone else's life. Theirs. 3 shadows on the porch as the last light faded. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Some stories end with words. This one ended with smoke. The kind a barefoot girl once watched from far away, wishing and wishing and wishing she could sit beside the fire that made it. She was sitting there now, and the fire was warmer than anything she had ever dared to imagine. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.